Welcome back to the Inside Source Executive Video Series. I'm Dawn Tura. I'm President and CEO of Sourcing Industry Group, and with me today is a dear friend of mine, Tim Brown from Equifax. Tim Brown is a Senior Vice President of Global Sourcing at Equifax. He's had 31 years in IT industry experience, with the past 16 years focused on global outsourcing. Since 2005, Tim has been leading the Equifax Global Sourcing Office, the GSO, responsible for managing nearly $300 million of annual outsourced spend in application development and maintenance, ADM, infrastructure technology outsourcing, ITO, and business process outsourcing, BPO. So he's certainly an expert in this realm. Tim and I had the fortunate experience to be able to travel to some tier 2 cities in China together, and you have a lot of experience in other countries like India and China. How do you work so successfully in Equifax to get the cultures to blend and work so well together?
Well, first of all, let me say thank you. I appreciate the opportunity to get to talk to you, and as always, I enjoy every SIG conference that I've come to, so I've had a great time this week. But the question on culture, I think is an important one. Certainly, we've got processes and best practices in place to make sure that we understand some of the nuanced cultures within each of the countries that we're in. And those are important because, as implied, in each one of the countries, there may be certain situations with regards to how those vendor employees are specifically focused on their families and supporting their extending families. So how they have their commutes to work, how their hours are set, and how other aspects of the job that we require them to do, we certainly take those into account. But I would take the point on culture maybe in a little bit different direction, in that more so than the differences in the cultures, I think what probably is important to note is that all cultures have some similarities in terms of it's important to everyone to be heard, everyone to be recognized for a good job. Everyone wants to understand the direction and the impact that they can make on whatever they're being asked to do. So
you start with the likenesses rather than the differences,
yes.
And that's such a positive approach. I like that.
Yeah, exactly. So, and in that regard then, so we try to ensure that there's an inclusiveness in all regards of making sure that our vendor employees who are directly aligned with critical path projects that we've got to have delivered, that they understand the impact of what those projects are going to do, how they're going to be aligned with our growth playbook within Equifax, how they're aligned with our overall annual objectives, and then we recognize and reward them as we meet our objectives. We recognize and reward them. So again, it's a universal culture thing as far as I'm concerned, and it works well.
So the other area that you're quite well known for is that you get really strong stakeholder alignment. So there must be some secrets to it. And how do you work along with your stakeholders?
Well, I appreciate the confidence that apparently others have in my ability to do that alignment. One thing that we've done early on, and when I joined Equifax 10 years ago, the way that our supplier and sourcing objectives were done was really in a very decentralized way. So, of course, first of all, we put that into a centralized organization, and it's probably important to note that global sourcing that I manage is separate from IT and operations. So I actually report up into the legal.
Into legal.
Into legal.
I did not know that.
Which is unusual. But what that does, it actually helps in terms of that alignment and stakeholder buy-in, because I've got certain mandates that come down from legal, and under our legal umbrella within Equifax, we've got the compliance organization, we've got the security organization, the sourcing organization, and then the rest of all the lawyers themselves. So when there are mandates that are coming down, certain things that have to be done, typically those mandates are coming because of some sort of regulatory or something that's going on from a legal side that ultimately moves into how do we have to have those kinds of things within our sourcing contracts. So fortunately, I'm right on the front end that's coming from the organization that I'm part of, but in the same measure, I'm also matrixed and aligned directly into our COO and our CIO. So I sit in their staff meetings, I'm part of their leadership team, and integrated myself or others on my team, integrated directly in with all of their leadership decisions as well. So I think because we're right on the very front end of those kinds of discussions, and then I know what the mandates are that are coming down from a corporate standpoint, through compliance, regulatory, security, what have you, we can bring those into the discussions early, which builds a lot more alignment, a lot more stakeholder buy-in when it's early in the discussion, and you can talk about how are we going to deal with those kinds of initiatives, versus being on the back end of, hey, now that you're asking us to do something, I have to now tell you you can't, or here's why it can't be done that way, or here's some constraint or restriction that we have.
So you're closely aligned with the CIO, and you talked about risk as well. How is that at Equifax? And we've talked about everything about risk today, and it's been the topic of conversation. How do you manage risk in your part?
Risk, at the end of the day, again, because of where I'm at in the organization with legal, risk is probably number one and first and foremost in everything.
Well, especially
that we
the
do.
data. I mean, you have data.
We're a data company.
Yes.
Right? So there's a number of enterprise risks that we look at, but most critical is the data. I mean, we're not a supply chain manufacturing company, so we're not looking at risks of, where certain assets or natural resources are going to come from for our supply chain. Ultimately, the focus is on data, protecting the data, ensuring that our commitments to our clients are met, and that the commitments that we expect from our third parties are met. And separate from the actual sourcing responsibilities and buy-side responsibilities that I have, I've also got a group that does nothing but third-party management risk. So its directives come, again, from compliance and security. So they've got an approach that they've taken, which is to look at and categorize all of our data. So we've got 5 different categorizations of data, from most critical, highest risk in terms of if it was breached or in some way compromised, it's the most critical, to the 5th, lowest, which we still monitor, but it's not going to be detrimental if something were to happen on a breach with that type of data. So we've categorized the data from a risk standpoint. We've gone through the process to know who are, extensively, who is every third party that we've got any type of engagement with within Equifax, and then what type of data do those third parties have access to, and then what's the classification of that data. So once we kind of have that definition and know, where that risk is with regards to the data, then we've got different best practices and processes that we have in place that really hold people accountable across the entire enterprise, both Equifax employees as well as our third-party employees, to say, how are we going to confirm and validate how that data is being handled, is being done within our expectations on an ongoing basis. So in some cases, that's a daily validation that's done that we track and monitor. Sometimes it's weekly, monthly, quarterly, but it's all tracked and monitored within a group that's, again, that's under my management, but separate from our buy-side sourcing. And then they've got the oversight of that, and then all the reporting that if we're audited by the regulators, we can show affirmation that we've met those expectations. And then if we're audited internally, or if our compliance team says, hey, there's some type of new regulatory requirement, we can bring it right back in and really address it from a risk standpoint.
So you're the first person I've talked to today who sounds mature in their risk management process, to the point that you sound comfortable. Like, there's always going to be a smarter person out there. But you guys are doing a great job.
Comfortable might be a strong word. I'm confident, very confident that in terms of what the regulatory side of the house expects us to do, that we're meeting the regulatory side, which is important, because I certainly wouldn't want to have a situation where if CFPB were to come in and look at our program or our processes, that we have gaps. So I'm very comfortable, if that's the right word, from a regulatory standpoint. But even if what we've heard here over the last couple of days, and I appreciated hearing the speaker at lunch today, or at I guess it was at breakfast this morning, where she gave some insights from her experience at the White House of all kinds of cybersecurity things that they're dealing with, and what could be and what we need to watch out for. And certainly, not that any of that was necessarily new, because we hear that a lot as well from our security side. But it really brought it home with some of the examples that she has, that you're never really safe per se. I mean, the bad guys are always one step ahead of you. So it's a matter of trying to ensure that you keep them one step ahead and not 10 steps ahead of you. And in that end, I guess there's some comfort level that we're doing that.
Well, I'm glad to hear it, since I have all my data with you. So Tim, we're out of time, but I just want to thank you for joining me today, and I always look forward to spending time with you and hearing from you, so thank you.
Very good. Thank you.
I appreciate
Enjoyed it.
And we're out of time today, but I want to thank you for joining us for the Inside Source Executive Video Series, and I'll see you next time.